Hello, this is Sarah from knitandme.com, and I am so excited to share my 3 favourite crochet tips with you today. So there are lots of different little hacks and techniques that I use almost every day, and it was really hard to narrow down to 3. But the ones that I've picked I think will help you to get the most bang for your buck in terms of making an impact on your crochet projects. So let's get to it.
So my first tip is about how to work into your starting chain. So I don't actually like to work into these front loops at the top of the chain, but I rotate it and work into the back bumps instead. So working into the chain in this way gives you a lovely neat edge and will make the start of your project look pretty perfect. So you can see how this technique gives a lovely neat straight edge to the bottom of your work, and it is pretty much how I always work into my starting chains. My second tip is to learn how to crochet a chainless foundation row. So this technique offers an alternative way to start a crochet project instead of working a long chain and then working into those chains to create your very first row. So here we have a foundation single crochet row, foundation half double crochet and foundation double crochet. And with this technique, you're actually working the first row and the chain both at the same time. And it gives you a lovely stretchy first row to your project, so it's great for things like garment necklines or hat brims or anywhere where you do need a little bit of extra stretch. So let's go right ahead and see how to work these stitches. Okay, so for the foundation single crochet we are going to start with a slip knot and a chain 2. And now we will insert the hook into the first chain that we made, yarn over and pull up a loop. And now we have 2 loops on the hook. And the next thing we're going to do is to chain 1. And this is to replace the regular starting chain that you would usually do to begin your crochet work. And then we will finish off the single crochet by pulling through both loops. So let's repeat that again. We insert the hook into that false chain, that extra chain that we made, yarn over and pull up a loop. Now let's make another chain and then finish off the single crochet. Let's do a few more of those. So you can see that we are creating our starting chain and our first row at the same time. Okay, so you can see that gives us a really nice, stretchy, flexible first row. So this is perfect for any project that requires you to start with a row of single crochet stitches. So moving on to the foundation half double crochet, we're going to start that off in the exact same way. So we chain 2. And now, as with normal half double crochets, there's an extra step here where we need to yarn over and then insert our hook into that first chain, yarn over and pull up a loop. And now we have 3 loops on the hook, as we normally would for a half double crochet. So then we do our extra chain and then finish off the stitch. So let's yarn over again, insert our hook into that extra chain, make our next extra chain, and then finish off the stitch. So we keep going for a few more of those. Okay, so that is our foundation half double crochet row. So the third foundation stitch that I'm going to show you is the foundation double crochet, and you can probably guess how this one is going to go. So we start with a slip knot, and this one is going to start a little differently. So we're going to start with the chain 4. And this is because usually in a double crochet row, the first chain 3 counts as 1 stitch, so that's the chain 3, and then that's the fourth chain is the bottom one that it's sitting on. So we're going to yarn over, insert our hook into that very first chain, yarn over and pull up a loop. Now add our extra chain and then complete the double crochet as normal. And let's keep working. A few more of those. So insert the hook into that extra chain, yarn over and pull up a loop, chain one, and then complete the stitch. Okay, so that's the foundation double crochet stitch complete. And just to remember, when you are counting your stitches, that you will count that chain 3 at the start as one stitch. So here in my swatch I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches. So my next top tip is to use stitch markers. Now there are lots of different types of stitch markers. So there are these ones that have a little opening on one end, and they're the easiest if you want to be able to take it in and out really quickly. And there are also these locking stitch markers that you can close. So these are good for maybe marking the edges of rows, or for somewhere that you're going to want the stitch marker to be in place for a little longer. And then there are these fancier looking ones as well, if you are into something a bit more decorative, or you can buy all different types of these on Etsy. I think these ones are from We Crochet actually, but if you want something to kind of inject a little bit of personality into your projects or to reflect your own personality, then these decorative ones are fantastic. So let's look at a few examples of when stitch markers are really, really useful. So my favourite way to use stitch markers is anywhere that I'm not sure about the placement of a stitch. So I have just finished off a row here, and this little sample is all double crochet stitches. And sometimes when you are turning to do a new row, it can be tricky to figure out which stitch you need to work into first. So for a double crochet row, normally the first chain 3 will count as a stitch. So that means instead of working into the first stitch, you're going to be working into the second. And if this is confusing, the best way I have found to get around it is to mark the last stitch of my row with a stitch marker before I turn. So then I'm going to chain 3 and turn my work. And now, because I know that this chain 3 counts as a stitch, I know that I do not need to work in to this marked stitch. So my first double crochet is going to be in the next stitch of the row. Okay, we can continue on along the row as normal. Now another useful application for the stitch markers here is, let me just remove that one, is to actually mark the top of that chain 3. So you can see here, this is our turning chain 3, 1, 2, 3. And if I just mark the top of that stitch, that is going to help me when I come back to work into that at the end of my row. So let's actually do the same thing at the end of the previous row, so you can see exactly what I mean. So we have 1, 2, 3. So let's just mark that third chain there and then finish off the row. Okay, so remember that chain 3 counted as our first stitch, so we're just going to remove the stitch marker and then work last stitch into the top of that turning chain 3. Okay, and there we go. So another way I like to use stitch markers is to keep track of what is the right side and what is the wrong side of my work. So sometimes it's very obvious depending on the stitch pattern that you're working, but sometimes it isn't. And if I am working on a project where the front and back are reversible, then I must confess I do sometimes get confused about which is the right side. And the best way that I have found to get around this is to just mark the right side with a stitch marker. So you can put it around any stitch, any row, and this is telling me that this is the right side of my work. So another great use of stitch markers is in the name, and that is to count your stitches. So here I have a super duper long starting chain, and often you might find that you get interrupted or you lose count of how many chains you've worked. So this is where stitch markers can come in really handy. So usually I might mark out every 10 or 20 chains, depending on how long my starting chain is. So then instead of having to count out all my chains multiple times, I can just go 10, 20, 30, 40, and so on. And I'm sure there are plenty of other applications of stitch markers. Those are my favorite ones that I'm using right now.
So there you have it. Those are my 3 top tips for you to try out in your next crochet project. And if you do try them out, or if there's another tip that you'd like to share with me, I would absolutely love to hear from you. So my website is nedandmimi.com, and I'm Ned and Mimi in all the other places too. So there are a few different ways to find me. So thank you so much for watching. Happy crocheting and take care.